Good morning, everybody. We are just waiting for everybody else to join us on this call, on this webinar. For your information, there is a chat box available if you would like to ask questions. And we will just give everybody a few minutes to join. We are going to be talking about saving files into the Autodesk Docs platform today with Revit and Civil 3D and AutoCAD, specifically with a view on collaboration. And it's really critical today because so many companies are joining the Autodesk Construction Cloud and hosting their projects on the internet so that there is only one source of truth available to them and that they can connect everybody on that construction project. It does scale very well. Some very large projects that I've been involved in, and it works really, really well. So I think we've got most that will join at the moment based on our attendance, and so with no further ado, let's continue with the webinar. Our agenda today is to look at what it means for Autodesk Docs to be the one source of truth. That we want to investigate what the Autodesk Desktop Connector is. The Desktop Connector is an additional piece of software that needs to be downloaded when you start your cloud project. We're going to pay specific attention to the file name path limitation, and then we're going to have a look at what and how we should manage Revit files as cloud models so that other people can link them in. And then lastly also have a look at AutoCAD and Civil 3D. And that's just as an introduction. We'll be looking at how we use Autodesk Docs and Collaborate Pro, which is another Autodesk software that operates on the cloud to save files to the Autodesk Construction Cloud. First of all, because we are working in the on the internet, on Amazon servers, we must have a proper internet connection. I would recommend 15 to 25 megabit per second symmetrical connection. You'll see that the recommendations are pretty much on a performance level 25 megabits per second asymmetrical. That's available for you from the system requirements for Docs. And you'll also see which browsers are supported: Chrome, which is what I use, a Google platform, as well as Firefox, Safari, and Edge. And then with the mobile apps, we've got iOS 12.2 and up, and then Android OS 6.0 and up. The mobile app is not the same as what you might be used to on the old platform. Remember, the Autodesk Construction Cloud is the new connected platform, and I'm still evaluating that with regards to how it operates with a cell phone versus an iPad, but it seems very user-friendly. And then both the US and the Europe data centers are available for you when you start your hub. An important consideration where data security is of import. So if you were to be involved in a European project, which is of course what the Construction Cloud is great with, it can connect anybody in the world with anybody else to operate within their environment. There are 2 data centers available, United States, which is a much more lenient data security policy, but with architecture not really such a big problem. But for instance, we've got one naval architect that also uses this platform, and because they work with Germans and other European partners, they then use the European data center to host their their projects. It's closer aligned to what we have in South Africa, but typically with architectural projects, it doesn't really make much difference. They are closely aligned, but the latest technology is typically available on the United States work server. Then your files are typically model files, Revit files, Civil 3D files, but it's important to understand that once the files are loaded into the cloud, that our communications and our metadata assignation to files, they become part of an information model, which after your BIM model is created, or the design model, that of course adds to it. So that would include things like reviews and issues and markups. Those are all saved in the cloud and is available from the cloud, not necessarily to be downloaded with files, but encapsulated within that information model. That then increases as you go through to your project information model, which is during construction, your as-built, your project model, your asset information model, where we look at tracking assets and management of assets, and ultimately into facilities management, which is these days done with Autodesk Tandem. Some of you might be familiar with Autodesk Ops. Tandem is the newer platform that is being developed by Autodesk, specifically for digital twins, and they can now leverage files directly from Autodesk Docs. So it comes back to the idea of one source of truth, where these files are updated as you update them on the Docs platform. They will then be updated on the cloud as well, and through into Autodesk Tandem, so that the latest information is available for whoever is setting up the facilities management or digital twin construction on Autodesk Tandem. And that is the connected platform, so it's working towards a true common data environment, which the old platform wasn't really, but that is a work in progress. So keep an eye on Autodesk Tandem and the new developments with regards to digital twins, and that will be the future that we have to look out for. The ultimate purpose of our digitizing our architectural models is to manage our buildings with a digital twin. The Autodesk Desktop Connector is, you can think of it like a Dropbox or a OneDrive, which synchronizes files off the cloud onto your computer. But there are some issues to note here. Firstly, the files are stored on an Amazon server, and it's on the internet, and it's accessed by team members in a permission-controlled project environment. So you can say who needs access to which files, and then you don't get people modifying other people's files when they shouldn't be. So we can still silo our design teams. And the access can be done via a web browser. That's the typical access to it. Once desktop, so that little bit once desktop, that happens because of the desktop connector, where files are synchronized down onto your file or via mobile app. But of course, that's not the desktop connector itself, that's just on your phone. And for each one of those platforms, the capabilities differ. And ultimately, the information is still going to be shared onto the cloud. The Autodesk Desktop Connector is used to synchronize user files to their hard drives, much like Dropbox or OneDrive would do, with the added bonus that transactions executed by Autodesk software is more reliable than other platforms or a virtual private network. So at the beginning of lockdown, or just before lockdown, a very large architect here in Cape Town, Stefan Anthony, we had a success story with them. They decided, because their architects worked in, at that stage, Italy, and came back into the office, and Italy at that stage was very high in COVID, they decided to send everybody home, 150 people plus or minus, from their offices before we officially locked down. And they then found that working with virtual private networks resulted in corrupt files. Similarly, the collaboration wasn't available for them to use on Dropbox or OneDrive. That is a purely Autodesk technology that is available on the cloud. And one of these advantages, what that means is that when you are working with a BIM file, that would mean a Revit or Civil 3D or Plant 3D or an InfraWorks file. Those are all known as BIM platforms. In the background there is a database that is running, and on that database there are things called stored procedures that execute information against the database. Think of that as your central file. And if the packages of information does not reach the central file or the file on the cloud, then it will roll back what it was doing, keeping your file intact. So if for any reason the communications is interrupted, you won't end up with a corrupt file. And that is one of the major reasons why you would migrate onto the Autodesk cloud as opposed to using Dropbox, OneDrive, or even a virtual private network, because you don't have that problem. Then files the user is busy with or need to open a file automatically synchronized to the user's hard drive for 36 hours, after which it is deleted from the hard drive. This is both a benefit and a liability or a weakness within the platform. Not really a weakness as such, but a limitation. And the reason for that is when we install the Autodesk Desktop Connector, you will find that the Desktop Connector synchronizes your projects down onto your hard drive. You can see on this PC I've got Autodesk Docs. There are some projects or some hubs that have been connected to my computer. These are different people's licenses where they've created their hubs either in the European Union or within America. And you'll find that under your C drive in your users, under your name, your Microsoft username, there you can see ACC Docs. Now this is important to realize because we've got the first part of the file name there. Just note that whatever path is on our computer is synchronizing via C drive users and then the user name. And for those of you that are familiar with Revit files, you'll know that your username identifies you uniquely. And if you don't have a common drive network path for Revit files, it will fail. This is also true of Xrefs and of data shortcuts if you use Civil 3D. But because we are using the desktop connector, it, in inverted commas, it fools the software into thinking that this path, the beginning of that path, is the same for everybody. So that is also important with regards to the length of the file name, which we'll discuss shortly. But this is then where our projects are housed in our hub. You can see that I am busy, for instance, with a sort of a test file here called Kobe 2023. And then I've got some other folder structure in there. And I specifically just want to show you as well what that folder structure looks like for me. You can set this up however you would like. But when you start one of these projects, if you are the owner of the hub, so if you are the owner of, say, Micrographics Cloud, the hub where we host our projects, then when you start a project, you have only the capability that you have by virtue of owning a license to add to that project. All right, so this is the Autodesk Construction Cloud. There are obviously some products that you can look at over here. If you want to see all the products, you can have a look at it there. The two typical ones that we find people use is Docs and BIM Collaborate Pro, and then Build for the construction guys. And when you log in, you can then choose to log in via the American server or whether you want to be on the European server, depending on which you are working with. We work on the American server. Where we sign in with our Autodesk information, and then we will find that our projects are available to us here. There's my Kobe 2023 test project, which I use to test. And if I look at the project admin over here, then you'll see that I have assigned various different licenses that we have access to. For instance, myself, I'm one of the project admins, and there you can see I have added to myself the docs license, which is one of the licenses that you get either with the Autodesk architecture and engineering construction suite, a collection, or that you can purchase individually. So for some guys, they still work on Revit LT and they need to be connected to the cloud, and so they buy a docs license. You can buy them as standalone licenses. Then we've got the build, the cost management, the insight, the design collaboration, the model coordination, and the takeoff modules. And if you own one of these licenses, then you can assign it to someone else. It's also a bring your own license model. All right. Or if you've got more than one license, you can assign the license to them. But the point is, the point I'm trying to make is that if you only own a docs license, you will only be able to assign the docs functionality to someone else, regardless of whether or not they've got the build or the design collaboration or model coordination license. So if you host a project, you must make sure that you've got the correct licenses to assign to somebody else. And based on what you are working with, you want to create a file structure with Autodesk Collaborate Pro in mind. So we need to create teams and silos ultimately, but let's suppose that you start out with a docs license. You can still structure the file structure so that it is conducive to an easy working environment with the other guys. So you'll see that I have created within docs my folder structure and my permission structure based around the idea that everybody is going to work within their own silo or within their own team. So I have this collaborate folder. Think about it like a work in progress folder, and there we can see that we've got the architecture, the BIM, the civil, the electrical, the facilities management, mechanical and structural. Each one of those will operate as a silo. Now when you end up using Collaborate or Collaborate Pro, then you will find that you've got swim lanes from which you then manage your information or package sharing with other teams. This is not available to you if you only have the docs license, and you will be then copying files instead. There you can see some swim lanes, and if I wanted to share information with any of the other teams, then you can see on the project timeline, we can see when somebody has shared a package with someone else, what information are we sharing with them, and as well what information are they accepting from us. When we use that workflow, you'll find that you've got consumed files, and then the other teams are replicated in here in your consumed file folder. So it will copy whatever information, say for argument's sake, civil or structural shares with architecture or with everybody else. They will then consume the file, and it will copy from within structure, silo or team into the consumed folder of the architect. So you can already set this sort of workflow up right from the beginning, even if you only have a docs license. If you create a Collaborate folder, and then within that Collaborate folder you have each of the disciplines that are represented by a team or a silo. Later on you might also generate plans, and again you could have some other workflow for or folder structure for your architectural published drawings that can be subject to a review process, which is available on docs and that you can set up. But the work in progress folder, that really should be, I would recommend something called collaborate, and then within that the individual teams, and within there we can have a look at a file naming structure, which is also important. So the simpler we keep this folder structure, the better. All right. To carry on with the presentation, so we are over here, create a file structure with Autodesk Collaborate Pro in mind, just in case you need to incorporate that later. Two of the things that become available to you then is that you will have access to the swim lanes as well as automatic clash detection, which can take the place of something like Navisworks if you are used to working with Navisworks. What's nice about that is the communication around the clash detection can then be accessible to everybody, and you can then communicate with each other via something that we call issues. This is also important. The version of Revit that is first uploaded or saved to a new Autodesk Docs project sets the version for the project. So if you wanted to test the project and you were working on 2023 for argument's sake right now, which is what some people are working with, the minority of users would be using Revit 2023, whereas most projects that were started this year would have been in 2022. And if you had to set up your project and you just wanted to test it and you upload a 2023 file, then it's set in stone. Unless you want to go to 2024, but that's not out yet. You cannot revert that project back to 2022. That's very important to remember. So use the version of Revit that you would like the platform to be on. It's not backwards compatible. Not even Autodesk can reverse that for you. You will have to create a brand new project and start everything from afresh. And if you've got, say, 100 users and you've assigned permissions and you've invited everybody to the project, then you'll be bothering everybody else with the second invite and permissions and everything else that you have to set up, which is no fun. Yes, you can use a sort of a template if you want, but still, it is not a pleasure to have to set something up twice when you can do it better the first time. And that's one of the things, probably the most important one, when you create a new, just make sure that your Revit version is in the version that the project is going to be on. Then another thing that is true is that for all of their software platforms to communicate effectively, it is recommended that they're all on the same version. That means year. So if everybody is working in 2023 and you have a sign-off from all the partners and your consultants, then by all means go ahead. And just make sure that we've got Civil 3D, Revit, InfraWorks, whatever we are using is on that version. The software updates are also important and must be managed. And then there is something that we call bridges within Autodesk Docs that we can use to copy information from one project to another in bulk. So that can be a folder structure and or files that can then be copied from one project to another project, as long as you've got permission to do so. And it could even be from one hub to another hub. So from one company that owns some projects to another company that also owns some projects, you can copy information from one to the other. And that's very powerful. The 244 character limit does come into play and is a typical problem for guys that start using the platform, where they might have a very complex folder structure. You can see that coming into play in something like this project over here. You'll see that the Kobe 2022 name I even shorted to just become CO2 or Kobe 2022. And the reason I did that was because I wanted to test Civil 3D on this platform, and I just used it with a simple folder structure from an Essentials textbook. And the result of that was that I got some big areas under my Collaborate folder under Civil 3D. Now you can see our guys start delving into the folder structure. There is our Civil 3D training. I was specifically interested in data shortcuts. And there you can see there are some data shortcuts files. But you can see it's a complex folder structure which really was not conducive to having a short file name. Right, so as you delve in here, you'll see that each one of those names are added to the file path, and that causes big problems. So don't create a complex folder structure, especially for the Civil 3D guys. Try and keep it simple. The way that we keep it simple is by adopting a naming standard. And the typical naming standard that's in use at the moment is called ISO 19650, where there's a specific naming convention. I've just used the old UK convention, where we have a 3-character code, but that can be edited to be anywhere from the fixed 3 to something that's longer. Right, so you can modify that to an extent. I think most people use 5 or 6 for the project code these days. You can have a look at your originator. You can have a look at the volume and system and the level location. Those are all parts of the file name, so that tells us where it is, what level it's on, what type of file it is, what the role might be, and then the number for the file. That's a typical idea around this. And then in addition to that, you'll see that the related attributes or metadata that is attached to that file, which you have to enter manually, is the status. So what is the file meant for, the revision, and then also the classification if you delve into that sort of detail, where we use a classification table based on some other standard to classify that file. And the result of all of that is that when we have a look at our files, we'll see that they are within our silos that we've created in our collaborate folder. You'll find that there are only so many files and they conform to a file naming structure. So instead of having this complex folder structure that we might find within a textbook, which is really troublesome for the software when it synchronizes to your hard drive, instead of that we would isolate or classify the files within a naming standard, and that means that we can also filter based on some or other metadata that we are looking for. And if we had hundreds of files in our folder, we would still be able to filter that out based on some or other attribute that we would like to use. Then your file path wouldn't be so long and your computer would not reject it. So this is a big change for some guys, because they don't always know what it is that they, maybe they've got a company file naming structure, but the more companies conform to a specific naming structure, in this case the ISO 19650, the more the easier it is for companies to interoperate and to understand each other's files and what is happening to that, and for us to go and filter out these informations based on what we are seeing there. So we could isolate, for instance, all the architectural files, or all the disciplines that might be with X or so on, even the review status. So that's very important. And then managing files that are unable to synchronize to the user's hard drive is not a good situation. One should prepare for this in advance. Just making a note that the file naming standard is very important and you should stick to that. All right. The other limitation, which I haven't expressly mentioned here, are things like point clouds. All right. So you would see that on the previous slide that the information is only available for 36 hours unless you open that file again. Now, unlike Dropbox or unlike OneDrive, you can't tell a very large file that it must stay synchronized with your computer beyond 36 hours. So on the civil side, if you are using point clouds, which might be a few gigs inside, if you only open the file after 36 hours, it's then going to want to check for the new files and start synchronizing. And if you just had to open your Civil 3D file and you've got a lot of those coming in, it might take quite a while for that file to load. So when it comes to extremely large sets of information like point clouds, still recommend that you keep that on your hard drive as opposed to the Autodesk Construction Cloud directly. Right, and then just with regards to Revit or Revit LT, if you have a Autodesk Docs license, you have to have a Docs license, then you can save a Revit file directly to the cloud. What does that mean? It's different from just uploading a file to the cloud, and it is also different to establishing a shared or a works shared file on the cloud. So there's three ways really to get a Revit file onto the cloud. You can upload the file, you can save the file there, or you can initiate a work shared file. So we just like to have a look at that quickly. What I've done is I've just opened up a typical sort of sample project that we've got within our installation directory, and if I wanted to save this file into the cloud, I would go to File, Save As, and then we find that this cloud model is available there. Right. Now, regardless of whether or not you've got Revit LT or Revit, you will find that you've got the ability then also to state what you want to publish from your Revit file onto the cloud. That's in your publish settings, and you can then publish that file onto the cloud as well. Right, so they've included that for Revit LT, which I don't have on this machine, but the workflow is pretty much the same. And then when you go File, Save As, Cloud Model, then you will be able to browse to your Docs project where you are going to save this model as a cloud model. And as soon as you do that, it will allow you to link that file into another project. So here you can see that I'm just saving this sample file into my architectural, I'm just going to leave the file name as it is. Obviously it doesn't conform, but I'm not enforcing the naming standard, it's just a demonstration. And I can then save that file onto the cloud like so. And you will then see that appear within this folder over here. It usually takes a while to process information into the cloud. The model has to be disseminated in the cloud, and it creates a cache on your hard drive and a cache, and that makes the next saving of the file much faster. So again, it's something that we recommend at the beginning of a project, not towards the end of the project. Otherwise, it might take hours to process that Revit file in the appropriate manner. If you do that from the beginning, it's much quicker, especially with work shared files as well. You can see that it's saving this model to the cloud. That's the correct way if you are working with other people within the cloud to save your Revit files, regardless if they are Revit LT or if they are Revit. Okay, as long as you've got a Docs license, you can save it up into the cloud. If you have Revit and you don't have a Collaborate Pro license, then you can't initiate a work shared file on the cloud. So there you can see the sample project has now been uploaded onto the cloud, and it's available for us to go and have a look at when it is done. Right. So that's the one method. As soon as we've done that, let's close this now. Then if we have another cloud project, let's suppose we have a architectural sample project. Which I'm also going to save into the cloud. As a matter of interest, just to have a look and see, and when we try and link, just save this file as, file save as. Now we've got a choice in the Revit cloud, right? So we've already seen how that works. Alternatively, what we can do is we can just save this out of a, let's suppose we wanted to create a central file, then we could save this out of our write protected library. Save it. I usually save it into a temporary location on my hard drive, just my desktop. And as soon as I've done that, I can go ahead and collaborate in the cloud. So when I collaborate, I can now say, do I want to do with on a local area network, which is the traditional way of working with central files, or in the cloud. Right. So if you've got Collaborate Pro as opposed to Docs, then this is the method that you can use to create a work shared file where multiple people can go and work on that file. And again, we just choose which folder we load that into. Now, provided you have access to the folder, which is why I saved that structural file into architectural, not into structural, you will then be able to link that file into your other model. So again, this will take a little bit of time to process, so just go through some of the other points while we're waiting. Alright, so there's definitely 3 ways of getting files onto the cloud. You can just upload them, which will hide them from somebody else if they want to link it into their projects. Or you can save as a cloud model, or you can establish that as a collaborate or a co-authored model. Okay, and the availability to save onto the cloud is also available on Revit LT. And when files are saved to the cloud, others can link the files directly into their models from the cloud, ensuring that they have the latest version available. And unless users have a license of Collaborate or Collaborate Pro, you will not be able to share your files with others via swim lanes, like we've seen, in a safe environment built to satisfy UK level 1 2 protocols. That's technical jargon or technical speak for if you want to properly communicate your information with other teams within a large project, then you'll need a Collaborate or a Collaborate Pro license. The difference would be is if you work on your own, then you wouldn't need a central file, so you can have the Autodesk Collaborate license, or otherwise, if you do work in a team, then each one of you would use a Collaborate Pro license. Let's just see how our file is doing by now. Okay, it's done. And now you'll see that we can synchronize as we are used to on a local area network. We can now also synchronize with the cloud model, which we will find is sitting, well, the published version thereof. I won't go into the details, but the published version thereof is also now within the cloud. Just want to see if they are okay. That's good. And once this is in the cloud, this is strange, my Revit link isn't available on the 2023 software. I suppose we've got some gremlins in the system over here. The Revit link, you should be able to link in other Revit projects. So something has gone wrong with my software. It's not allowing me to link files in, which is clearly a fatal error. Let's just have a look and see if we can't get something decent going over here to demonstrate for you. My apologies about the software. Let's have a look. Gobi 2023. Collaborate Architect. Here's my Kobe model. Because we are recording as well. So let's just, I've deleted some files from our hard drive, so let's just have a look. If we then open from the architect our sample project. From architecture, of course, if we run out of space, then we won't be able to link files in. And I think that is what we are observing here. Yeah. Alright, so also make sure that you've got a nice big hard drive so that you can have information available to you what you need. Alright, the linking process will work the same as with most other Revit files that you might be familiar with, so I do apologize about that. Then, Autodesk Docs users also can get access to automatic clash detection, but with Navisworks you can also create files on your hard drive, so you would actually save the Navisworks files not onto the cloud, but onto your hard drive itself. Remember, this is on your C drive under your username. You can then save your files into your specific folders. That's where you can save them. If you've got Navisworks files, you can save them over there. They'll be synchronized to the cloud. Alright, so when Autodesk or when AutoCAD files are saved to the cloud, there won't be an option to directly link or extract the file in from the cloud. Instead, you will revert to your folder, what you're used to, and there would be an AutoCAD file that you can then link in or extract in. Right, that will happen directly from your hard drive. But like I mentioned, it will then treat, because you're running docs, it will treat the first part of that name. It will treat that as a commonly recognized folder structure. You would link that into Revit, or you would extract that into another file, with a proviso that extracts must be relative and not absolute. That is important, because if it's absolute, then it's going to try and find the originator of the file or the hard drive on which it was originated, and it won't work. Then do not link files from outside the Autodesk desktop connected docs on the hard drive. That's true, of course, unless it is a point cloud or an extremely large file which you will save onto your hard drive. Otherwise, it must be synchronized to the cloud. And if you do that, if you do host files on your local area network and then you just link them into your file, then the other users won't be able to access them. All right, it's as simple as that. So that Autodesk desktop connector for AutoCAD and for Civil 3D files is vitally important. When you open them in AutoCAD, they are automatically locked on the cloud, and that means that only you will have write access to them. That's a little bit like Vault. And then I did read something interesting this morning when preparing for this webinar as well, that your locked files open with proceed with caution, and one of the reasons for that, interestingly enough, was that the versions of AutoCAD might not have been the same. Okay, so if you are working together in a project, then make sure that all the users are on the same version of AutoCAD. Civil 3D files have some more items to consider. The Civil 3D files behave like AutoCAD files, with a few additional points to consider. Right? Only when one has a docs license and you're working on your own in Civil 3D, then you'll be able to publish surfaces to Revit to link in. Okay, there's various things to take into account there, including that southern hemisphere coordinate systems don't often work like this. But if you are working in the northern hemisphere or on a project where you're using a coordinate system that's amenable to this, then you can use the Civil 3D and the docs license to publish whatever surface you are preparing in Civil 3D onto the cloud and link that directly into Revit. It's a nice workflow, especially with parking lots and so on that you might use in Revit. And then when data shortcuts are used on Autodesk Desktop Cloud, for those of you that don't know what Autodesk data or Civil 3D data shortcuts are, they are like an XREF, but it's where we split a Civil 3D file or model up. Somebody might design the topography and the terraforming. Somebody else might do the pipe network. Somebody else might do the alignments and the profiles for the roads and the sub-assemblies and assemblies. And we can then work as a team with each other because we can dynamically link or reference in the data shortcuts that we've created on our project. Right. When you want to use data shortcuts, then you must have a Collaborate Pro license. Docs will not do. Right. So your XREFs, a Docs license is sufficient, but as soon as you get to a Collaborate Pro, or the data shortcuts, then you need a Collaborate Pro license. Otherwise, the software will not work with it. And then this is very vitally important because, especially on large projects, we find that on a local area network, some guys are using sheet sets. Obviously, it's a functionality that's or capability that's available on a local area network and within AutoCAD and Civil 3D, but it's not yet mature enough to use on the cloud. Right, so there's definitely a sort of a warning here. Please be careful if you are heavily dependent on using sheet sets to generate your documentation packs for a civil project. Then just be careful to make sure that you don't get into trouble with your generation of sheet sets. Okay, so sheet sets are nice because we can open AutoCAD files in the background to generate a drawing pack from without actually opening the file. And if you are hosted on the cloud, then that's not necessarily going to work for you. So just be careful of that as well. So see, we've come sort of towards the end of the broadcast. And just if there are any questions, just type them into the chat box. And since we haven't had any questions either, we'll just lastly put on our contact information. If you have any queries, then we've got various branches around South Africa: Cape Town, Johannesburg. Cape Town is where I'm based, Johannesburg, Pretoria, Port Elizabeth and Durban. And with that, I wish you a wonderful day further, and I hope that you get involved in a cloud project one of these days. It's a lot of fun, and the communication and the methods of working, it doesn't take long to learn. After a week or two, you'll be very comfortable there, as long as you've got internet. And yeah, looking forward to hearing from you, and until next time, keep well.